right, we're coming down to the last section of the sleep module that talks more about like naps, travel, those type of things. Just more some tips to think about that maybe aren't the mainstream things that you have to focus on, but just some added value for your thoughts about sleeping for performance. So the question is, can napping improve overall performance? And I think the data is really good that yes, strategic napping can improve overall performance. We'll take a look at that data now. So napping is thought to contribute to the overall volume of daily sleep required by an athlete. So if you think about, hey, I'm trying to get 8 to 10 hours, I only got 8 hours, I can add and increase the amount of sleep for that day by taking a nap sometime throughout the day. And then we kind of think of it as two different ways to nap. So like a replacement nap would be, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, I'm going to catch back up. And then a prophylactic nap would be, hey, I'm going to be traveling, or I know I have to be up late for some type of training session, I'm going to take a nap prior to that loss of sleep. And so those are two different ways that we can approach it. It really has been shown to positively impact both physical and cognitive performance. So if you think about the physical benefits that we already talked about, as well as the cognitive benefits, it just makes sense that napping can improve both of those things. Where we see it helpful most is when an athlete is already in a sleep deficit. So they have lost some sleep, or over the past few days they haven't been getting good sleep, and a nap can be really helpful in that situation. Now there is a strategy by taking a nap, with taking a nap. So ideally we want that nap to be in a 30 minute to 90 minute time frame. You know, it has something to do with the sleep cycle, and that if we can time it right, that we're not in this deep sleep, then we won't have as much grogginess afterwards. So kind of waking up at the end of a sleep cycle is ideal. Now, you can't time it perfectly, but that may be ideal. We think that some of the shorter naps may limit that deep sleep, so you don't necessarily get the recovery benefit, but you might get some of that cognitive benefit. Whereas the longer sleeps may allow us to get both of that cognitive and physical recovery that would be more similar to like what you would get in the evening time. But each athlete is unique. It's important. Like some people really just can't nap; they're too tired afterwards, and some people, they enjoy those mid-afternoon naps. But you can be quite strategic about it. So there is this kind of dip in our circadian rhythm that around the 1 to 3 p.m. time frame is when we do get a little bit of sleepiness. And I think everybody kind of notices that after a lunchtime. But there is some thought that if we take that 30 to 90 minute nap in that 1 to 3 time frame, that can be the best strategy, and you still have enough time to be able to get tired again prior to going to bed that night. There are some thoughts that if you have an early morning practice, so for example, you have practice at 6 a.m., let's say you're a high school athlete, it's in the summertime, maybe doing a 11, 12 o'clock nap may be helpful in that recovery process. Then late afternoon naps, really we want to avoid those because anything that's beyond a 4 or 5 o'clock is going to disrupt your evening sleepiness, and so we want to be thoughtful about not trying to nap at that time as far as a strategic process. Now there is this thing called sleep inertia, and it really has to do with that grogginess after we're asleep. And so really we see this quite a bit in adolescents, even when they're not sleep deprived, but there is this sleep inertia or feeling of grogginess that we should consider when we're strategically planning that nap. So, for example, if you are trying to nap in that 1 to 3 range and you have practice later on, if you're a person that has this prolonged sleep inertia or this grogginess after you sleep, then you either want to make sure you have plenty of time from when you wake up to be ready, because it can certainly impair performance for up to 1 to 2 hours. And I think those of you who participate in multi-game tournaments have seen that, where if an athlete sleeps a little bit longer than they should, or takes a longer nap, and then they only have like an hour till game time, they're just not their normal self. They don't have as much energy. And so just keeping that in mind as far as how you would approach a nap, especially in a tournament setting. You just want to be able to give yourself enough time to recover out of that grogginess, especially if you're someone who already knows that's something that you deal with on a routine basis. And then sleep banking is kind of the opposite. So what we do with sleep banking is strategically adding some extra sleep in, getting a few extra hours here or there in order to prepare yourself for a time frame when we don't have that sleep available to us. So for example, again, if you're traveling, if you've got a tournament coming up, if you're traveling and you have a tournament, that may be a strategy where you say, hey, I know this is going to be a lower sleep weekend. So during the week, I want to get to bed a little bit earlier. I want to kind of bank that amount of sleep so that I can use a little bit of that reserve when we get through the weekend. And so I think thinking about that ahead of time is really nice. And that's why I really encourage these written plans, because you need to be strategic. You can't just decide on Friday that you have 2 games on Saturday that you're going to want to get some extra sleep that day. You need to be more strategic about that and think about that much earlier in the week. Okay, what is melatonin? So melatonin is a hormone actually that's produced in the brain, and basically it helps to regulate the sleep-wake cycle. There's a few important things to know about melatonin. Melatonin is not a sleeping pill. It is not believed to be addictive in any way, but it is a hormone. And there are some out there that are a little bit nervous about giving a hormone, just like you wouldn't give any other hormone as an over-the-counter medication, just something that's a little bit more regulated. So some people are a little bit apprehensive about giving a hormone over the counter, but it is thought to be safe. And the whole point of melatonin, at least as far as we know, is that it gets increased when there is darkness, and that helps to regulate the body's rhythm by which we fall asleep. So there are some other effects of melatonin, but we don't quite know them just yet, the mechanisms. But we do know that when it comes time to go to bed, melatonin is increased. But we also know that light, bright lights, blue light, screen light, does decrease melatonin. So you can see why that recommendation of an hour, 30 minutes prior to bed really should be off of screens, because that can certainly disrupt your melatonin and then dysregulate the rhythm by which you fall asleep. The better that transition occurs from awake to sleep, you get that consistency better, you get that sleep latency low, so it's taking only 10 or 15 minutes to go to bed. That promotes quality sleep because you're able to then get the recovery and performance benefits that you're trying to get. So as I mentioned, there is some debate about the longer term effects of melatonin. However, it can be helpful in traveling athletes. Check with your medical provider, but generally I recommend anywhere from 1 to 3 milligrams, depending on age, to get the effect that you want to get. There are higher doses. I've seen 5 and 10 milligram doses, but I've also seen some data to say that there really isn't much difference between, say, a 3 milligram, a 5 milligram, and a 10 milligram dose. So what we try to do is strategically use that to help adjust to the new time zone. So, I think if you're a high level athlete or recreational athlete and I'll use, my state of Arizona, for example. So if you're going to Las Vegas or you're going to LA, adjusting your sleep based on the time zone of, one time zone or certain parts of the year, no changes. I really wouldn't focus on that and trying to take melatonin for those purposes. I think a good example is, if you live in Phoenix and you have a tournament or competition in Orlando, Florida, which happens quite frequently, that may be a time where trying to have a strategy to make some adjustments can be quite useful. So I think melatonin is helpful in certain situations, especially if you have these longer time zone changes. But 1 to 2 time zone change probably isn't really necessary to be taking any over-the-counter supplements.